Greetings. Hello. Welcome to Vampire Church. My name is Mo. Today I will be speaking with inspiration from The Secret Tarot by Dominic Murphy. What is Vampire Church, you might ask? Well, a little bit over a year ago, I was heavily involved with the vampire world. My mentality was such that I couldn't disconnect myself from my spiritual self. I was enraptured with the nature of the vampires. I was enraptured with the vampires themselves. I was living a life of a vampire, and because of that, I made friends with other vampires, and we would gather together to have vampire church, and we would gather together at the break, just before the break of dawn, I should say, just before the sun would rise. We would get together in the early morning hours, probably around 3 a.m., 4 a.m. We'd wake up. I would lead vampire church. Sometimes we'd read excerpts from the Bible, and sometimes we'd listen to music, and sometimes we would just spend time with each other. And so I hold a vampire church today in the night here to carry on that memory of my life and to indulge in the darkness, because as you know, vampires live by the night. And so we will be drawing cards, as I said, to speak about the essence of the vampire. The first card we drew is card 0, the Fool. It is a very macabre fool. The fool thinks in his heart, there is no God, there is no goddess, there is no one leading this circus. But even if you do say in your heart that there is no God, there is no goddess, you still believe or have faith in something. And if you don't, you should have faith in yourself. Because having faith in yourself says, I believe in myself. I believe in my capabilities. I believe in my powers. I believe in my power of manifestation. I believe in my power of being. I believe in the power of me. So you have card 0, the Fool. The darkness is not something to be afraid of. A lot of people say love and light, and so do I. I often snuff out my candles and I send love and light to make all right. You know, and even though the darkness is inviting and we live by the darkness, there is also, as we have here in this card, card 28A, Scandere, there is also the idea that society drills it into our head that we need to act a certain way, be a certain way, look a certain way, talk a certain way to fit into society's box of what a sane and healthy individual is. And though I don't dig up my nose. You know, I don't tell myself that medication is not necessary, that doctors aren't valid, that psychiatry is, you know, not real. All that stuff is valid. But I think at the same time, once we learn to deal with our mental illnesses, our mental blocks, we understand a little bit more about ourselves. And in my case, when I first started delving into telepathy and imaginary beings talking to me, which now I believe are probably real beings, it's hard to have that break from reality initially and to feel like you're not raging against what's happening to you, because that is what happens, not just to me, but I'm sure to other people as well. They have these mental breaks because they can't understand why they aren't as society wishes them to be. They can't understand why they end up in a psychiatric ward, and why it's being drilled into their head that everything that they've experienced is psychoses, that it's not real, that it's a break from reality, that it can be explained by science. And yes, as well, it can be explained by science, but it can also be explained by spirituality. You know, back when mental illness was really unacceptable, and so I've heard they would perform torturous experiments on those who are considered mentally ill. And this card kind of points that out. It's a masked being drilling a hole into this head of this human. This can also be drilling in the macabre, drilling in the fantasy. It's hard at first. It feels uncomfortable. But once we realize what reality is and what the reality of spirituality is, what the reality of even the 5D is, we can live in those two worlds simultaneously. And yes, there is a delicate balance between sanity and insanity. But for me now, on my 40th year of life, I finally know what voices to shut out. I know who's who in my head. I know where to draw the line. And yes, we had the Fool, and the Fool says, I advance without knowing, right? Whatever I encounter will be a surprise, but it will be a welcome surprise. That's kind of how I started off my mental illness journey, like the Fool. And it was scandalous to think that I would end up in the hospital for a month, twice. Why? Why? Because I was a danger to myself. I don't think I was a danger to others, but I could have been definitely a danger to myself. And so I am thankful for the doctors that took care of me and for the nurses that helped me. I'm grateful for the psychiatrist that's following me. I'm grateful for medical attention. I'm grateful for science. I'm grateful for romance. The romance of the vampire. And in my first vampire myths, legends, and lores video, I talk about the vampire and how the vampire has evolved over time to become romanticized. but how before the vampire was romanticized, people who would commit heinous crimes would be considered vampires. And so vampire is a romanticized term. It's a term that Hollywood created, you know, through the vampire movies, vampire shows. But there's something so taboo about stepping into the darkness and creating a church solely for vampires. A city that only comes out at night. Living like so few people choosing this life. Walking with umbrellas, drinking blood. Voluntary blood, of course. So what's the lesson today for Vampire Church? Maybe it's that you're not alone. We have Exoculo, La. Opus Magnum. You're not alone dealing with voices in your head. You're not alone wishing that you could live by the light of the night, by the light of street lights, lamp lights, artificial lights, candle lights. The devil is in the details. And that's very comforting to know, because isn't it the details that count? You may feel like your brain is being split in two with what you're experiencing. But know that you're not alone. There is a whole society out there, few and far between, but there is the society out there that believes the way you do. Perhaps that love is a lie. Perhaps that no one accepts you. Perhaps that no one understands you. We have Wheel of Misfortune, card number 10. And we have Kishi, card number 16A. Wheel of Misfortune. You know, looking back at my life, looking back at the past 10 years, being admitted to my first psychiatric hospital at the age of 29 after my life collapsed and fell apart, and then trying to rebuild despite the misfortune. And now looking back and feeling like there's two sides of me. Maybe you feel that way. There's two sides of you. There's a side that people don't see underneath that tough exterior. And there's a side that you see in the mirror when you look at yourself. Maybe you've been through a lot of misfortune. Maybe people would not understand your story. Maybe people wouldn't understand how hard it's been to fight against your mental illness, or fight against the voices, or fight against the ideas or the thoughts or the story that's become reality for you. Wheel of Misfortune, card number 10. You know, I met Lucifer in Colorado. No, not in Colorado, in Tennessee. I met Lucifer in Tennessee in a lodge. We were staying there as a family. And at the time, I was wrestling with Christianity. Card 12A, Neuf de Fou. Let those people who tell you you need to be X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, let them be amongst each other. Let them discuss their beliefs with each other. Let them dissect reality with each other, dissect spirituality with each other. Let them go off on their high horses. And you figure yourself out. The strong person that you are. Figure yourself out. Figure out who you are. Despite all the struggles, despite the mental collapse, despite society pushing reality on you, let yourself embrace the journey of the Fool. Embrace the voices. Embrace the reality. Embrace the wheel of misfortune, perhaps being hospitalized like I was, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've worked in a hospital. I work in a hospital. We had a psychiatric ward. It was always the same people coming in and out of the hospital on the psych ward. It's hard to take medication. It's hard to want to take medication. It's hard to shut off those voices, those audible voices through taking medication. It's hard to be alone in your mind. But your experiences will always be with you. And you'll always know the truth, even on medication. You'll always know the truth of who you are. You'll always know the truth of where you come from, what you've experienced. You and those with you in your head. And maybe you'll never be able to explain what you've been through to people so that they can understand it the way you experienced it. Card number 36A, Trimurti. Again, coming back to those multiple personalities, those multiple identities. Who's watching? Spirit, universe, source, divine, goddesses, gods, spirit guides, ancestors. They're all watching. Maybe you don't believe in a life outside of the 3D. And if that works for you, that's fine. Maybe you're just curious to see what Vampire Church would be about. And that's fine. But know that there are people out there who are experiencing exactly what I'm explaining. So embrace the journey of the Fool. The first card we had, card 0, the Fool. Embrace the journey of the Fool. Embrace your darkness. Embrace those voices. And if you don't like what they're saying, shut them out. Tell them you don't want them there. Tell them you don't agree with what they're saying. Tell them you don't want to hear them anymore. And if you need to see a psychiatrist or a specialist to help you deal with those voices, please do. Because from experience, I know what it's like to have critical voices nonstop talking to you in your head. I know what it's like to be up all night fighting them. And I know what it's like to be on medication to the point where you can finally live again. So that's it for Vampire Church for this evening. I hope it was helpful for those of you who might be experiencing something like this, or maybe for those of you who've never really experienced something like this, but who were curious and who found out a little bit of what they might not have known being inside somebody who has mental illness's head and understanding a little bit of what we go through. I'm not proud of my mental illness, but I'm happy with my life and how my life is turning out. And I will always embrace Vampire Church, and I will always embrace the spirit of the vampire. For after all, we do seek absolution. So maybe there's something that we can do right to receive it. Until next time, my name is Mo Moon. Blessed be.